Welcome to Andy Audio Vault. I have with me here today this new dongle from Fosi Audio, which is DS1, as you can see here on screen. So let's just have a look at the content itself first. You get the dongle itself, which is this. Very simple looking dongle, in fact, black USB-C to USB-C cable here, and USB-A to USB-C adapter. Pretty much very simple, and of course some instruction inside the box. Okay, now let's just have a look at the specification itself. Okay, and as you can see on screen right now, in fact, this is a dual ES9038Q2M ESS sub-array DAC. How many VRMS this dongle is, I cannot find that information, but I suspect it could be anywhere from 2 VRMS all the way to 4. But most likely it's somewhere between 2 to 3 VRMS. But at least we have the configuration here for the output power itself, which is rated at 220 milliwatt at 32 ohm per channel from the balance port, and a decent 120 milliwatt of power at 32 ohm as well from the single-ended. And the signal to noise ratio is in fact quite good at 120 dB, which means that this DS1 is in fact very silent even when paired with highly sensitive IM. Have a look at the weight. This thing is in fact 38 gram. This thing is built like a tank. You can actually feel the weight. Let's just talk a bit more on some other feature. For example, right, this thing does not have support for microphone. I can confirm with that. And also, you notice here, these two buttons. These are in fact adjustable volume adjustment buttons, which are independent, thankfully. And I can confirm it is in fact independent. It does not actually, attach itself to the hose. And here, if you press the button concurrently like this, what it will do is that switch between low mode to high gain mode. And as you can see on screen here, okay, they call it high level mode, which is designated by color of yellow on the LED here if you operate it. But the default mode will always start at low level mode, which is practically low impedance mode. I am happy to say that this thing capable of running up to 12 hours, and that is actually an impressive number to achieve for something which is relatively powerful like this. Before we proceed any further, let me just show you first the sort of equipment that I have used to test this Fosi DS1. Because, make it like this, a DAC cannot make sound on its own. It is definitely always be judged on what type of partner attached to it. So in order to do that, let me just show you this. The first one here is my ATOMOS ER2XR. This is single micro dynamic driver, which is at around 5.8 mm in diameter. So this is my staple tool to test. And of course, I have with me here a hybrid, my favorite in fact, which is Bequest Winter. This is bone conduction driver and dynamic driver. Okay. And I also have with me here the more traditional dynamic driver IM, which is Tangent Zero, which happened to be my favorite as well. Okay. And of course, I have another hybrid, slightly different configuration, which is a combination of dynamic driver and balance amateur. So this is perhaps the more common type of balance amateur that, or should I say, hybrid IM that people use. Okay. And I also have with me here representation from magnetic planar, which is Tangzu Zetianwu Hede. This is rather large magnetic planar for an IEM. Okay. And last but not least here, another multiple driver configuration IEM, which is C Audio Bravery. Inside here, there's 4 balance amateur. So as you can see, pretty much all type of IEM are covered here. Okay. And of course, for headphones, I have here with me Hi-Fi-Man HE400 SE, magnetic planar, 91 dB of sensitivity, and this Sennheiser HD 650. For sound impression, grading, and rating itself, you're going to join me here, as you can see on screen right now, to go through all these 10 different category which I have identified. So starting with 1 until 4, which is pertaining to the sound itself. 5, 6, 7, driving power, synergy, and volume management. 8, 9, 10, features, value proposition, and power efficiency. So let's just straight go into the first one, which is sound, dynamic presentation. I am happy to say that this DS1, the tuning itself is definitely a dongle which I consider as being neutral, transparent, uncolored, and accurate. And when I say accurate, it does not, provide any kind of flavoring to the sound itself. What I am hearing from this DS1 is in fact the actual sound as intended by the source. So that is definitely a good thing. And of course, still on the dynamic itself, the extension of the dynamic is definitely among the top performer. I can hear proper micro and macro details from the lower frequency, mid-range, all the way to the upper frequency. And the way it handles the dynamic transient itself, it is fast, it is resolving. I would consider it as being analytical as well. So on the element of dynamic presentation, I definitely will give it a 9, which is a very respectable score. And now we'll touch on the tone and timbre balance. This DS1 being neutral, uncolored, the good thing about it is that despite being practically analytical and somewhat clinical, accurate, it is thankfully not as digital sounding as some other, highly technical DAC which I have used before. Because sometimes in the process of being analytical, some DAC may lose the element of musicality, but DS1 does not suffer from that. So definitely, I'm just going to give it a 9. Next one will be note width and density. So we are talking about the richness of the sound itself. How does it sound like? Okay, when I attach this DS1, especially with my ATOMOS ER2XR here, I can clearly hear that, there's a richness to the sound itself. Because typically, that ATOMOS rated at 96 dB is not an easy IM to drive, and usually a less than proper DAC or amp would probably make it sound a bit lean. But DS1 does not have any issue with that. And even when connected to this Hi-Fi Man HE400 SE, which is even way more demanding, I am hearing proper weight to the sound itself. It is full, rich sounding. So definitely on that part, no issues there. Just going to give it a 9. And switching to technicalities, perhaps the best and the most prominent thing which I have observed with this DS1 when it comes to technicalities is that the sound stage. Sound stage itself is still relatively dependent on the type of the IEM itself, okay? The partner attached to it. This DAC or amp does not have their own kind of sound stage. But what is important is that how do they synergize? How do they actually complement the native soundstage of the attached partner? And I can safely say that this DS1 offer a good sense of space to complement a wide sounding sort of staging, including the head stage itself, the headroom, and the sense of space between instrument and from the listener. So definitely this DS1 is a very good performer when it comes to staging. And also the other aspect of technicalities. Again, I already mentioned this previously. This is very resolving. It has very good power to resolve, very strong imaging. The imaging itself is crisp and in fact analytical. It has good ability to resolve, macro and micro details, and definitely, it has proper amount, or should I say the pace, the momentum, the speed itself to handle complex music or composition. So the speed is definitely top notch. So with technicalities, definitely it scores high, 9. Next would be driving power. Let's just make this simple. This DS1, for anything under 300 ohm, especially for IEM, even this magnetic planar of, heyday, absolutely no issues with power. It will drive all of them to the fullest potential. I am not hearing any kind of sense of loss when it comes to, driving capabilities. So the only thing left was that whether it will synergize well or not. Okay, so power, no issue with highly efficient partners, even up to magnetic planar IEM, and even up for this Hi-Fi Man HE400 SE. When I attach this big guy to DS1, I am in fact hearing the sort of presentation that can be expected as of when running from my desktop setup. Perhaps the only thing that I felt missing, if I were to compare them right side by side, just the sense of headroom. But if I am not comparing them side by side, definitely I would say that I am happy to run the S1 together with Hi-Fi Man HE400 SE. However, I must also note that when switching to the max capability rated for this DS1, which is 300 ohm, this Sennheiser HD650, then I would just simply put it this way. The soundstage felt even narrower because I know that HD650 can sound wider if you push more power into it. So DS1, despite being able to present proper loudness, in fact, it was around 4, let me see, let me check. The volume itself was at around 26 out of 100. So no issue with loudness when driving this HD650. But I can feel that the presentation of the dynamic itself is just probably at around 80% at best, because I sense that the imaging is not crisp enough. And in fact, the sound itself would appear slightly softer, So definitely, I would say that subjecting this DS1 to 300 ohm is about the absolute max you can do. So for driving power, at best, I'll just give it a 7, which is fair. Now let's talk about synergy factor. Synergy simply means how well does this DS1 pair with different type of partner. I have shown you earlier, I have pretty much all type of IEM in front of me there. And I would say that definitely the S1 will not have any issue at all driving or pairing with any one of them, because the S1 being transparent, neutral, and uncolored, and in fact accurate, the original sound signature of those connected partner will be preserved. So that is definitely one thing which I really appreciate. And even when connected to this Hi-Fi Man HE400 SE, all right, it has power. It also synergizes really, really well. What I'm getting is a proper balance of, technicalities and musicality, which something that I really appreciate. And of course, the only issue that it has with Sennheiser HD650 was related to the absolute power. But the synergy itself, when it comes to sound presentation, it is in fact quite good. So for synergy factor, I'm just going to give it an 8. Next would be volume management. So as you can see here, this thing have independent volume adjustment. When attached to my phone especially, I set the volume at maximum on my phone, lock it out, adjust everything just from here. And because of this 100 steps, it is definitely one of those volume adjustment which I really love. Being able to do fine tuning, I really enjoy that. And definitely for this part, I'm just going to give it a 9. Now let's talk about the feature of this DS1. First, this DS1, as I mentioned earlier, is equipped with ES9038Q2M. To my knowledge, all right, this DAC in particular is highly configurable. But for some reason, Fosi Audio does not include that facility for the user to change the filter, the sound filter itself, like other dongles which I have used previously. It is in fact something which I felt that should have been included with this DS1, considering that the DAC itself inside here has a lot of potential to offer. And then looking at the high and low gain here, so I kind of like have question, does it really work, or perhaps I am not hearing it correctly? But I would just admit that, on harder to drive stuff, switching to high mode does present some, mild differences. But practically when using highly sensitive IEM, switching between high and low does not seem to offer any kind of, differences. And then next one would be the volume here between balance and single-ended. Okay, the power gap between these two is almost like, half. I would need to jump at least at around 7. So what I'm trying to say is that the loudness difference between this 4.4 mm to 3.5 mm is in fact quite huge. Not to say quite huge, it is big enough. But at least the quality from either this 3.5 mm to this 4.4 mm balance up to 32 ohm for IMs mostly, they're pretty much on equal terms with the quality itself. So no issues there. The difference of quality would probably be evident once you start pushing for something harder to drive. So for feature itself, I'm just going to give it a 7. And then now we talk about value proposition. So let's just have a look, okay, at the price of this Fosi Audio DS1. As you can see here from the official site itself, it is listed at 75.99 US dollar. I would say that that price is very competitive. In fact, attractive, because for this kind of build quality and sound quality, it is definitely one of those dongle which I would recommend. So for value proposition, it is definitely a very good score of 8. And last on the scoring there, power efficiency. This DS1, as I mentioned earlier, easily scores at around 12 hours when set to max at 4.4 mm balance, high gain mode, driving 32 ohm IM. So 12 hour is definitely a very good score for a dongle of this size. Okay. And there we have it. The total score is 83 out of 100. Very good. And now that we have the total number, let's just do comparisons. The first comparison that I would like to draw is, in fact, one of the earliest ES9038Q2M implementation, which is AudioQuest Cobalt. So if you look here, Cobalt is fairly okay. With the presentation of the sound itself, I would say that it is decent enough. But being one of the earlier implementation of this DAC, it is somewhat kind of a bit, when compared to the current standard, not as resolving, or should I say, it is kind of a bit too colored for my taste. It is in fact, having some issue with the presentation of mid-range. It's kind of like slow and bloated, and in fact nasal sounding with certain vocal type, especially soprano. So definitely, despite being okayish with some type of IEM, it does not synergize very well with dark sounding partner. So as you can see there, the total score for this Cobalt is at just 61. Definitely, this DS1 is a better performer. And then we have another one, which is quite popular as well, which is Shanling UA2. This is in fact a much better implementation of the same DAC as compared to the Cobalt. It is fairly good overall, and in fact, it is a 4-star rated dongle. But the major difference that I would say between this DS1 and that UA2 is, in fact, the dynamic itself. This is definitely more resolving, technically better as well, and in fact more neutral. UA2 is in fact a bit more colored and warmer sounding. These two dongle here, Hidis S9 Pro and IDA 9038, they pretty much came out at the same time, almost like 2 years ago. Even if you look at the sound presentation, these two are practically identical, because these two have very good capability with the resolution, with the imaging, with the technicalities. Perhaps the only caveat that I would say that, when I look at these two, it is kind of a bit, lacking in the terms of organic touch to the sound itself. But it is not exactly a deal breaker, because for somebody who like analytical sort of source, these two definitely score really high. And the next one, another dongle from Shanling that uses the same DAC, which is Shanling UA5. You see, there's a lot of things that I like about this Shanling UA5, except for several area, which is actually a deal breaker for me. First, the tone and timbre. The focus for this UA5 seems to be quite too heavily on the technical aspect of it. And in the process of doing that, it sacrificed a lot on the element of organic sound, or even musicality element to the output itself. So in order to truly appreciate this UA5, you cannot attach it to something like this ATOMOS AR2XR, or even, let's say, this Hi-Fi-Man HE400 SE. The sound will be just kind of a bit too much of being analytical and not much of being musical. But everything else is quite okay with this UA5. So in fact, because of that factor, I kind of like, rated it slightly lower than 4.5 star. It's just at 4 stars. Next on the comparison table is in fact this Muse Hi-Fi M3 released last year. And if you look at the total score for this M3, it is quite respectable at 83 out of 100. And in fact, it scores higher than AIDA and Hidis S9 Pro for the fact that it performs better on these two elements here, which is tone and timbre burden, not weight and density. It is in fact improved in that area quite audibly, at least to my ear, and definitely something which I would recommend as well. And then we also have here Reyin DA Plus. The funny thing is that this Reyin DA Plus is not that popular, but it is in fact, up until now, probably the best implementation of ES9038Q2M. I love everything about it, especially from the sound aspect. As you can see, it scores perfect 9, all 4 of them, when it comes to sound. And about the only thing which actually kind of like, letting it down is just this volume management, because it does not offer independent volume adjustment. And also the feature itself is kind of a bit limited with the feature. But otherwise, everything else, it scores pretty much on equal term with M3. And finally, we get to our DS1 here. So, funny thing is that I already shown you earlier, DS1 also scores 83. So in fact, mano o mano, if you look at the sound quality, it is in fact on equal terms with Reyin DA+. But somehow, all 3 of them managed to churn out equal number with the total score. So in fact, all 3 of them are 4.5 star rated dongle. Okay, now let's have a look at the sound characteristic itself. As you can see on screen right now, I have designated this table to indicate what sort of sound signature, or should I say the temperament of the tone and tonality itself. So as you can see there, the most analog sounding is in fact AudioQuest Cobalt. It is in fact warm analog sounding. Another warm sounding dongle, which is UA2, kind of like edging closer towards being analog sounding as well. And in fact, if you look at the 3 contender after that, which is S9 Pro, AIDA, and UA5, all of them are pretty much hardcore on the hi-fi type of presentation, which also means that they sacrifice quite a bit on the element of being analog sounding, less musical, at least to my ears. And in fact, when you look at the remaining 3, which is M3, that is where things started to get really well balanced. You see, with this kind of graph, it is in fact, the closer it is edging towards the middle, the better it is. Because what we will be getting is in fact a proper balance of hi-fi sound and also organic analog sound. So in fact, M3 performs the best in this aspect. And then we have Reyin DA Plus and DS1. Pretty much, I would say that impressive as well, because the indicator here move almost close to the middle area, which is again something which I really appreciate. Okay, let's just wrap things up for this Fosi Audio DS1. As I have shown you earlier, this DS1 is definitely a dongle which I consider as being wholesome and very well packaged in almost every way, from the sound itself, from the quality of the build itself, the feature itself, fairly powerful, and in fact, very well balanced between musicality and technicality, resolving, transparent, neutral. It is definitely a dongle which is very easy for me to recommend, especially considering the price at just under $80. Definitely a no-brainer to purchase if you are looking for a neutral, transparent, and technically competent dongle. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. I really appreciate it. And in fact, I have to apologize for the sunrise behind me. I don't expect, the sun to come up that fast. And you have a good day there. Stay tuned to Andy Otterwalk Dongle Madness for more contents like this.